The man stood surrounded by complete darkness. Only moments earlier, a bolt of lightning had struck the roof, igniting it and knocking out the power. After a brief pause to steady himself, he moved toward the window. He was on the main floor, and the last barrier between him and freedom had been the electrified mesh covering the opening. He hurled a glass of water at it, but the liquid merely splashed harmlessly against the glass. Summoning the last of his strength, he grabbed the mesh and tore it loose. The window swung open without resistance. He climbed out and sprinted toward the forest. He was finally free. Now all that mattered was putting distance between himself and the unhinged people who had held him captive. 10 minutes of running at full speed brought him to the edge of the trees. Once he was hidden beneath the canopy, his legs gave out and he collapsed, lungs burning as he dragged in air. His body felt drained, barely functioning at half its former strength. Any farther and he would have collapsed completely. Staring up at the sky, he saw only darkness behind him. That was a relief. The power was still down, which meant no one would be searching for him yet. After several minutes, the black spots clouding his vision faded, and his breathing slowly returned to normal. He pushed himself upright and made his way deeper into the forest. Every tree between him and that house felt like a layer of safety. Instinct took over as he navigated the brush with practiced caution. He would have moved even more silently if not for the awkward layers beneath his dress, which caught and rustled with each step. The lingering pain in his back and legs, fresh reminders of a recent punishment, kept him sharp and alert. The place he had escaped from had been pure madness, a house built on cruelty and control. At first, he had believed he was dead, condemned to some personal version of hell. From what he had overheard, his wife and her sister had planned for him to either be eliminated or reshaped into a completely submissive servant. The thought made his anger simmer just beneath the surface. A sound cut through his thoughts. He froze. It was a cry, low and strained, like an injured animal. That posed two risks: it could draw unwanted attention, and a wounded creature could be dangerous in its own right. Moving cautiously, he followed the sound and nearly laughed at what he found. In a small clearing near a cabin, an elderly man in a bathrobe was hopping frantically on one foot, the other trapped in a bear trap. The stream of curses coming from him was astonishing, creative enough to rival anything he'd ever heard, and some of it sounded like it belonged to languages he didn't even recognize. He hesitated. Should he help and risk losing the lead he had on his pursuers, or should he disappear into the forest while he still could? The argument played out quickly in his mind, but, as always, his conscience won. He stepped forward deliberately, making enough noise to avoid startling the man. Raising his hands to show he meant no harm, he spoke. The old man cocked his head, smiled warmly, and replied as though nothing unusual were happening, asking what he could do for her. He explained that he had come to help. The old man expressed his gratitude without hesitation. Bending down, he tried to pry open the trap, but his weakened strength wasn't enough. He shook his head apologetically and explained that they would have to work together. It would hurt, but the old man needed to shift some weight onto the injured leg and use his free foot to help force the trap open, leaning against him to reduce the pressure. The old man nodded, wincing as he followed the instructions. With a strained effort, they managed to release the mechanism. The moment the foot came free, the old man slumped to the ground beside his rescuer. They shared a brief, breathless laugh as they helped each other up, and he supported the old man as they made their way into the cabin. He offered to tend to the injured foot if there were any supplies available. The old man agreed, directing her to the towels and first aid kit, though he couldn't resist asking what exactly she was wearing. As she wrapped his foot in gauze, heat crept into her face, and she explained everything: her escape, the captivity, and the circumstances that had led her here. The old man asked if she was an escaped criminal. She immediately denied it, insisting she had never broken the law. She explained that her wife and sister-in-law had imprisoned her with the intention of destroying her identity entirely. Going back, she said, was not an option she would ever accept. The old man then asked what name he should use. After a pause, she gave it, asking him not to laugh, "Lucien Valemorn." The old man stiffened in surprise, recognizing the name and asking if she meant the wealthy entrepreneur. Lowering her head, she quietly said that title no longer applied. Not after what had been done to her. Something had happened the previous day, and when she woke up, her body was no longer the same. Proving who she truly was would be difficult, and the women responsible would eventually face the consequences. Her voice faltered, tears spilling despite her efforts to stay composed, making both of them uncomfortable. Just as suddenly, she pulled herself together. She insisted they needed to leave immediately. There had been guards, and the power would likely be restored by now. She believed she could be tracked, something had been placed inside her to ensure that. Rising to her feet, she moved to support the old man, slipping an arm around his shoulders to help with his injured leg. He gently stopped her. He told her there was no need, assuring her that no one would harm them there. Lucien froze, fear flashing across her face. She accused herself of being foolish, wondering if she had simply escaped one danger only to walk straight into another. The old man responded calmly, telling her she was safe. He admitted he was connected to Lady Isolde, but clarified that only convicted criminals were meant to be sent here. Someone, he said, had interfered with that process, and he was far from happy about it. He asked her to come with him so he could verify her story and find out exactly what had gone wrong. Lucien looked around the simple two-room cabin, unsure where the old man expected them to go next. Instead of answering, he stepped into the middle of the room, picked up a broomstick, and tapped a specific spot on the floor. The wood trembled, and with a low mechanical rumble, a concealed opening revealed itself. An elevator car rose smoothly into view. Grinning, he gestured for her to step inside. She hesitated only briefly before following him in, surprised to find a perfectly ordinary elevator interior. The old man joined her and pressed a button labeled Lab. The doors slid shut, and they began their descent. Though the ride lasted barely 10 minutes, it felt far longer. When the doors opened, they stepped into an enormous laboratory filled with equipment she had never seen before. Lucien stared around in amazement, but her inspection was cut short when the old man gently took her arm and led her to a device with a flat plate extending from its side. He asked her to place her hand on the surface and remain still until the scan finished, explaining that she could remove it once the machine signaled completion. His calm smile helped ease her nerves. As she complied, a narrow band of light swept slowly across her palm, accompanied by a faint tingling sensation. She asked what caused the feeling. He apologized for not warning her earlier and explained that the device was one of his proudest creations. It could read fingerprints and analyze biological markers without drawing blood, or without causing harm. After studying the data for a moment, he reacted with visible shock, exclaiming softly to himself. The machine chimed, and Lucien pulled her hand back only to feel the old man seize her from behind. Startled, she cried out and tried to pull away. He immediately released her, apologizing profusely in his thick Scottish accent and insisting he hadn't meant to frighten her. He explained that the scan confirmed everything she had claimed. There was no criminal history at all, not even a minor infraction. More importantly, he said, she was precisely what he had been searching for over the past 30 years. She asked him to let go and demanded to know what he meant. Realizing his mistake, he stepped back at once, clearly embarrassed. He said he needed to take care of a few urgent matters first and then promised to explain a remarkable story connected to her family line. Turning away, he adjusted a large scanning platform that resembled a medical bed and then beckoned her over. As she approached, she muttered that she didn't understand how he could possibly know anything about her ancestors. He assured her all would be explained in time and asked her to lie down so he could complete a full scan. He instructed her to change into appropriate lab attire, explaining that the scan required unobstructed readings. His tone was professional and matter-of-fact, emphasizing that the procedure was purely technical and necessary to remove the tracking devices that had been placed inside her. Without hesitation, Lucien discarded the hated uniform she'd been forced to wear, eager to be rid of it. The relief she felt was immediate. Following his guidance, she lay down on the platform, and he positioned a cover over her before activating the scanner. A soft beam of light moved steadily from her feet upward. She felt brief tingling in a few areas, then nothing at all as the scan reversed and completed its pass. When it ended, the old man leaned into view, smiling broadly. He told her the procedure was complete and that all the implanted devices had been removed. He admitted, with clear regret, that the technology used on her had originally been of his design, though never intended for someone innocent. Handing her a lab coat, he encouraged her to cover up and get comfortable. As she stepped off the platform and adjusted the coat, Lucien glanced down at herself. The reflection still felt unfamiliar, better than before, perhaps, but not entirely her own. She asked who she should thank for freeing her from everything that had been done to her. The old man apologized for neglecting introductions and formally announced himself as Professor Alistair Blackwood III, adding that she could simply call him Alistair. He admitted he couldn't bring himself to keep calling her by her full name and asked if she would mind the nickname Zoe. She tested it aloud, smiled, and agreed that it felt right. Then she reminded him that he had promised to explain how he knew anything about her lineage. He agreed but said there were a few precautions to take first to ensure they wouldn't be interrupted. Turning to a control panel, he pressed a button. A voice answered over the intercom. Alistair addressed the man on the line, Fletcher, and confirmed his identity. Fletcher reported that there had been an escape and warned him to be cautious around unfamiliar individuals, especially a young woman who had not yet undergone reconditioning. Alistair thanked him and asked how much Fletcher knew about the escapee. Fletcher replied that he had no personal details, as information was strictly limited. Alistair said he was pleased to hear that and added, ominously, that Fletcher would not face any disciplinary action. Confused, Fletcher asked for clarification. Alistair asked if he was seated. The sudden formality in his tone made Fletcher comply immediately. Alistair then informed him that the individual he was referring to was his guest and instructed him to listen carefully before responding. He explained that he had verified her identity and discovered she was an upstanding member of society with no criminal record whatsoever. This, he said, was unacceptable. He gave Fletcher clear orders: halt all procedures on the remaining inmates, ensure no further harm was caused, secure the facility, and bring Lady Isolde to the transport site with 2 trusted guards. She was no longer under his employment or protection. Fletcher was told not to allow her to interfere in any way and to notify him once everything was ready. Fletcher acknowledged the instructions, stating they would be at the transport point within 10 minutes, and ended the call. Turning back to Lucien, Alistair said they could finally begin uncovering the truth behind everything that had happened. He apologized sincerely for her treatment and admitted that even with all his technology, he could not fully reverse what had been done to her. However, he hinted at another option, one they could discuss over dinner later that evening, once he had dealt with the situation at hand. Another alert chimed, prompting the professor to let out a quiet breath. He murmured that it was time. He crossed to the center of the laboratory, where a circular ring of gold framed a marble platform, and activated a control. A pedestal rose smoothly from the floor, its surface lighting up with symbols. His fingers moved rapidly over the controls, too fast for Zoe to follow. A column of light surged upward from the circle and struck the ceiling, accompanied by the strained hum of machinery working at full capacity. Gradually, 4 silhouettes took shape within the ring, their voices echoing faintly as if from far away. A sharp, indignant demand rang out, threatening consequences if they weren't released immediately. As the figures solidified, the words became clearer. The professor replied evenly, addressing Lady Isolde by name and noting that the labs she mentioned were, in fact, his. Her voice cut through the room, harsh enough to make Zoe flinch. Fear washed over her at the sound alone. Noticing this, the professor gently took Zedo's hand and helped her to her feet. He assured her quietly that she was safe now and would never have reason to fear again. The reverent certainty in his tone puzzled her as he guided her to stand beside him. One of the newly arrived figures warned him to be cautious, pointing out that Zoe had not undergone any alterations. The professor answered calmly, stating that he knew precisely who she was and who she had been. He formally introduced her as Lucian Valemorn, emphasizing that she was entirely innocent and had never belonged in Lady Isolde's care. He demanded an explanation for such a grave mistake. Lady Isolde dismissed the claim and produced a small device, aiming it at Zoe and activating it. Zoe cried out and collapsed, bracing herself for pain that never came. She sat up, clutching herself in confusion, stunned that nothing had happened. The professor reminded her gently that the devices responsible for such harm had already been removed. With an embarrassed smile, Zoe accepted his help in standing again and apologized for forgetting. She admitted that Lady Isolde had been the source of months of suffering, and the shock had caught her off guard. The professor reassured her firmly that such fear would never return. Turning back to Lady Isolde, his voice hardened. He stated that he was aware she had accepted payment from Zedo's former family to misuse his facilities. If not for chance, he added, he might not have discovered the truth until much later. He questioned whether she had intended to conceal this betrayal or simply vanish. Lady Isolde tried to respond, but he cut her off. He reminded her of their agreement. The facilities were meant solely for convicted criminals. By violating that contract, she had forfeited her position. Authorities had already been notified, and they would determine any further consequences. He concluded by dismissing her outright, signaling that circumstances might one day place her on the opposite side of the process. At his nod, Mr. Fletcher activated the controls. The four figures faded away, one voice breaking into panicked cries before vanishing entirely. The professor then turned back to Zoe, smiling softly as he took her hand and told her it was time to leave. Light flared, a brief tingling sensation followed, and in an instant they were somewhere else. Zoe found herself in an expansive living room, warmed by a bright fire in a wide hearth. The professor stood beside her, exhaling contentedly. He guided her down a hallway to a lovely bedroom, elegant, welcoming, and clearly designed with comfort in mind rather than excess. He explained that it had once belonged to his granddaughter and hoped Zoe would feel at ease there. He pointed out the wardrobes, vanity, and private bath, encouraging her to settle in. He added that Clara would assist her while he prepared dinner, then bowed lightly and left. Zoe took a moment to absorb her surroundings, impressed by the understated luxury. Opening the closets revealed an astonishing selection of clothing and accessories. After a moment, she turned her attention to the bathroom, whose scale and refinement surprised even her, despite her familiarity with wealth. The shower drew her eye. Realizing how long it had been since she'd properly cleaned up, she decided it couldn't wait. She adjusted the water carefully before stepping in, yelping briefly when it was too hot, then correcting it until the spray became gentle and relaxing. The warmth eased her tension, and she lost herself in the moment until she sensed someone nearby. Startled, she turned to see a young woman standing nearby, holding bathing supplies. The woman politely asked whether Zoe preferred privacy. Zoe relaxed, explaining she'd simply been surprised and assuring her it was fine to stay. The woman smiled, saying she took pride in ensuring guests were comfortable. Zoe introduced herself and suggested using her name rather than a formal title. The young woman, Clara, smiled warmly and agreed, mentioning that the professor had spoken highly of Zedo's kindness. Clara gently turned Zoe and began washing her from her shoulders down, her movements careful and practiced. As she worked, she chatted cheerfully about how long she had served the professor and about the remarkable places they had traveled together. Her voice was calm and steady, the kind that made it easy to relax. She turned Zoe around again and continued, just as attentive, treating every motion as routine and professional. To Zoe, however, the experience was entirely new. The warmth of the water, the closeness, and the kindness in Clara's touch stirred emotions she wasn't prepared for. She didn't want to cause trouble or refuse what was meant to be a simple kindness, yet she could feel her heart racing, her thoughts growing hazy with sensation and confusion. Clara noticed Zedo's tension immediately and adjusted, slowing her movements and grounding the moment with reassuring words and a gentle presence. The closeness became less about the physical act of washing and more about comfort, care, and an unexpected emotional connection. Zoe leaned back against the tiled wall, overwhelmed not by anything improper, but by the intensity of finally being treated with tenderness after months of fear and pain. The release she felt was profound, leaving her breathless and shaken in the best possible way, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally lifted. In a quiet, mutual understanding, the moment passed. They laughed softly afterward, the sound echoing in the steamy room, and helped one another steady themselves, both a little unsteady on their feet. When the silence settled, Zoe spoke first, her voice low but sincere, making sure Clara wouldn't face any consequences. She thanked her honestly, saying she had never felt so cared for, but insisted they keep the moment private if that was safest. Clara smiled, warm and unbothered, assuring Zoe that there was nothing wrong with kindness or shared comfort and that the professor valued compassion above all else. She hinted, playfully, that Zoe need never feel alone here. Zoe couldn't help herself, she reached out, brushed Clara's cheek, and placed a light, affectionate kiss there. Clara returned the smile, and the understanding between them felt complete. A short while later, clean, dried, and lightly powdered, Clara stood behind Zoe, gently blow-drying her hair. They chatted easily now, like close friends or sisters, the earlier intensity replaced with familiarity and ease. Clara helped Zoe into elegant undergarments and stockings, adjusting a waist cincher just enough to subtly enhance her figure. The difference was slight but striking. Soon Zoe was dressed in a silk dress that complemented her coloring perfectly. A few moments at the vanity, with only the lightest touch of makeup, transformed her reflection. Her hair fell in soft waves down her back, natural and effortless. Seeing herself fully put together for the first time since her captivity, Zoe was stunned. Without exaggeration, she looked radiant. After thanking Clara with another quick kiss on the cheek, Zoe made her way to the dining room. Once again, the sheer grandeur of the place left her speechless. It felt less like a home and more like a royal residence. Seated by a formally dressed butler and greeted warmly by Alistair, Zoe realized she could have enjoyed even the simplest food in this moment. Thankfully, the meal was anything but simple. The dinner was exquisite, far more than she expected, and she wondered vaguely where she was even putting all of it. By the time dessert was finished, she felt pleasantly full and utterly content. They rose and headed toward what appeared to be a library. As they passed, Zoe leaned in and quietly thanked the butler for the wonderful meal. His wide smile said everything. The library itself was enormous, larger than many public ones she had seen. One section was clearly dedicated to research, with tables covered in ancient scrolls and parchment. Computer screens displayed images of artifacts and old texts. It was obvious Alistair had been searching for something very specific for a long time. Noticing her curiosity, Alistair explained that he had spent decades researching the truth about his kind. He had believed himself to be the last, until prophecies and records pointed to another, someone like him. A woman. Zoe. Together, he said, they represented hope for their entire species. Zoe listened calmly, surprising even herself. By all logic, she should have been alarmed. Instead, everything he said resonated. For years, she had dreamed of soaring through freezing skies on powerful wings, seeing the world from impossible heights, feeling invincible and free. Those dreams had never felt like fantasies, they felt like memories. She asked quietly if he believed they were dragons. Alistair's stunned expression was answer enough. She smiled gently and told him she had known, deep down, for decades, even if she couldn't explain how. Encouraging him to continue, she asked how he had discovered the truth. Alistair explained his years of study, blood analysis, ancient texts, stone tablets depicting great winged beings in flight. Zoe nodded, recognizing the imagery instantly. It matched her dreams perfectly. The story unfolded slowly, a powerful race undone by excess, internal conflict, and endless wars. Over centuries, they destroyed themselves until only one lineage survived. And now, at last, it seemed, it was no longer alone. This particular lineage of dragons was guided by exceptionally powerful sages who labored without rest, desperate to prevent their species from vanishing altogether. Humanity, still in its earliest stages of development, could never sustain the dragons on its own, but through relentless experimentation, the sages uncovered another path. Humans were taken and studied, and over time, something unprecedented was achieved. A hybrid was created, a being capable of carrying dragon blood and ancestral memory, preserving their legacy until a distant future when dragons might rise again and reclaim their rightful dominance. When the tale concluded, Alistair turned to Zoe, his eyes alight with conviction. He asked whether, as fellow dragons, they should finally bring the prophecy to life and return to the skies. Zoe let out a soft laugh and shook her head. She admitted that while she remembered dragons clearly and dreamed vividly of flight, freedom, and life above the clouds, memories alone did not make her one of them. Her smile lingered, though a trace of longing showed through. Somewhere deep inside, she wished it were possible to truly become what she had always felt herself to be. Alistair considered her words, then raised a small vial filled with a glowing amber liquid. He explained that his research suggested the mixture could awaken dormant genetic sequences unique to them. In a world of billions, he said, only the two of them carried this inheritance. He asked if she would risk everything to become a queen, just as he was prepared to risk his life to stand beside her as king. Zoe fell silent, weighing the question carefully. The life she had known had already been destroyed by betrayal and manipulation. Whatever future she might have imagined was gone. Slowly, she met Alistair's gaze, extended her arm, and smiled with quiet resolve, saying she was ready. Emotion overwhelmed Alistair. Tears welled in his eyes as he thanked her, saying she had given meaning to his entire existence. Preparing a syringe, he explained that the formula had been intended for two and that they would each take half. After cleaning her arm, he administered the injection without delay. Zoe felt a brief warmth, followed by a spreading numbness. Sensations unlike anything she had known before moved through her, pulling, shifting, transforming, yet there was no pain, only awareness. She looked toward Alistair and realized she was lying on the floor. He had already taken the remainder himself and was beaming with joy. Looking at her, he spoke with certainty, telling her that the change had begun and that she was becoming something extraordinary. Zoe smiled in return, filled with a deep, unshakable sense that this moment marked the beginning of something vast and wondrous, far greater than anything she had known before. Don't forget to join me on Patreon for exclusive content,